So next let's talk about the scope of GDPR. So GDPR applies really in two ways. One is an individual focus, and it covers any individuals who is in the EEA. So two things with this. First one is GDPR does not state that the individual has to be a resident, permanent citizen, etc. Given the way that the law is written, if there is a tourist, like let's say an American goes and visits France for a week, the way that the law is written, that American is covered by GDPR for that week. And the second is the EEA. The European Economic, generally speaking, people assume that GDPR applies to the European Union, but it applies to the EEA as a whole. So just be sure that you're including the EU plus Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein as you do your GDPR analysis at your company. And then the second way to look at it is organization focused. And any organization that meets at least one of the following has to comply with GDPR. If it has an office in Europe, in the EEA, and or it actively targets EEA citizens, and in this case it is citizens. Basically, if your target market is a country or people in the EEA, you've got to comply with GDPR. So, if you're offering or marketing goods and services to EEA citizens, if you sell goods in euros or any currency used within that area, or let's say your website is in English and you also have Spanish, German, and Italian, it's going to be fairly obvious that you're targeting Europeans as your target market. So the next thing we'll talk about are the rules that organizations need to comply with. They are that they need to help individuals exercise their privacy rights. They need to keep PII secure. And they need to notify individuals as well as EEA authorities of any data breaches that involve PII. And we'll talk about each of these now in depth. When it comes to assisting individuals exercise their privacy rights, number one, organizations need to respond to individuals' requests to exercise their rights, and we'll talk about what those are here in just a second. The second is they need to provide information on what's been done with those requests within 30 days. So if an individual says, hey, I want you to delete my data, you have 30 days to delete that data and inform the individual that you successfully deleted their data from all of your systems. Now, when it comes to rights, individuals have 7 rights. The first is to access their data, to have their data deleted. And a quick note, when it comes to accessing data, individuals are entitled to all of the PII you have on them. And remember, this includes any data that you've created through analysis about them. So deletion, so the data can be deleted. To give consent, so individuals need to be opted out by default. To correction, so somebody's name is spelled wrong, the organization is required to correct that name. To data portability, so this one is basically individuals have the right to have their data transferred from one service to another similar service. So let's say you're storing your photos on one photo platform. You have a right, or that organization has to have a mechanism in place so you can easily transfer that data to another photo storing service. However, you cannot transfer, let's say, your grocery rewards card account info over to your bank account. That's not covered because those aren't the same service. So that's what data portability is. The next one is to object to processing. So if an individual says, hey, I want to demo your product, but I do not want to receive newsletters or sales calls beyond the demo, you have to allow individuals to opt out. And then the last one is to restrict processing. This is pretty similar to objecting to processing, except, so let's say, for example, using it as an individual, you signed up for a newsletter, you've been getting it for 6 months, and then you're tired. of getting the newsletters. You can then, under GDPR, you're supposed to have the ability to unsubscribe, to be unsubscribed from that. So those are the 7 rights. If you have any questions about what they are, feel free to contact me, and we can talk about what they are a little more in depth. When it comes to keeping PII secure, organizations need to have a security program in place that appropriately keeps PII secure. It's dependent on the types of data that you process. So if you're processing names and email addresses and that's it, the things you need to do are not going to be as strict as if you're processing government IDs like driver's licenses, social security numbers, and so on. But just know that you do have to have a security program in place. That can include having formal policies and processes, having technical controls in place. There are a number of really great standards out there that can help you form a good security program. And so there's NIST 853, there's ISO 27001, there's SOC 2 Type 2, and so there's a number of things that you can use and research to build out a good program. We just talked about that. The second is organizations need to appoint a data protection officer or a DPO. This needs to be an executive level person or somebody with direct access to executives. This person is responsible for making sure that the organization is complying with GDPR, and they're required to notify EEA authorities if there's a violation of GDPR or a data breach. And lastly, this person cannot be reprimanded for doing their job. So if they find out that the company is not deleting individuals' data and they report that to authorities, they cannot be reprimanded in any way for doing that. And the third thing is organizations need to manage their vendors. Organizations are responsible for their vendors' actions as well as their vendors' actions for those that handle any PII. Additionally, if you're a controller, you have to approve of all of your processors' vendors. So let's say you contract out to a company to send emails. You have to formally approve of their vendors that process PII. There are a number of ways that this can be done. Usually it's done through a contract called like a data protection agreement or a DPA. Now, one quick note before we move on. I'm saying organizations instead of companies because GDPR applies to all organizations. So for-profit companies, non-profits, NGOs, churches, religious groups. If it's an organization, it applies. GDPR applies. Now, quick note: if you're an individual, you don't have to follow GDPR. So, like, if you go to the bar and get somebody's number, you don't have to sign a contract with them stating that you can have their number and text them, right? So you don't need that. Or if you're writing, or if you have a neighbor that you're writing to your sibling about, you don't have to worry about that. But if you're an organization, any type of organization, just know that you have to follow GDPR. Now, controllers are required to notify individuals and EEA authorities if there's a data breach. When it comes to reporting to authorities, that report has to be given within 72 hours of becoming aware of a breach. This includes if one of your processors have a breach that involves PII that you've had them process. So let's say your processor has a data breach at 5 p.m. on Monday. You are legally required by Thursday at 5 p.m. to notify EEA authorities. And so processors need to notify their controllers promptly. Most contracts I've seen require 24 hours notice. And then the notification to authorities needs to include a description of the breach, So what happened, what types of data were involved, and then what is the controller planning, what is the controller going to do to remediate the problem. When it comes to individuals, if a breach is likely to impact the affected individual's rights and freedoms, so Europe has a list of rights and freedoms. Basically, if it's going to cause them harm, if it's going to cause annoyance in their lives, if it's going to cause any level of disruption, for the most part, if you have a data breach involving PII, you have to notify individuals. There are a few exceptions, but they're going to be very, very rare. And then, however, individuals don't need to be notified if the PII was appropriately encrypted. So if somebody steals your encrypted database and you appropriately encrypted it, so you had proper key management in place, you used an appropriate algorithm like AES 256, you don't have to notify them, because it's highly unlikely that the hacker or hackers are going to be able to decrypt that data. Or if you've also taken steps to prevent individuals' rights and freedoms from being impacted. So let's say you didn't restrict access to your employees well enough, and one of your employees accessed a customer list, like the sales lead list, and they worked in, let's say like accounting. And then let's say the next day you shut down that employee's access, restricted it, you fixed it. You don't have to report it because they saw the data, but nothing bad's going to come of it. So that's an example. But again, consult with your lawyers on what you need to do.